Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Judy, and the Rees Centre for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share some of the things we've been doing at Priestlands. So Priestlands is an 11 to 16 comprehensive in Lymington. There's a little map there for you. Maybe you've hopped across to the Isle of Wight on a ferry from Lymington, or maybe if you're a sailor, you're familiar with the area. There's a little photo of our school there with our palm tree outside, just as proof of our Riviera credentials. A bit of context then, at Priestlands we've got about 1,250 students. Most of them join us in year 7 from about 10 local primaries. Our students come from a wide range of social and economic backgrounds. Some come from extremely wealthy homes, some experience quite significant deprivation, and everyone else is sort of somewhere in between. Around 150 staff work at the school, the vast majority of whom are actively involved in working with the students. We're deemed a good school, for what that's worth. We do well. We're up there amongst the best performing secondary schools in Hampshire. What we've been focusing on in the last few years is for a growth mindset to be central, a growth mindset on the part of the students, but also on the part of the staff. And we talk to students about our path to progress, which embraces those growth mindset principles and plays itself out in these 4 key characteristics: that we embrace challenge, we persist in the face of setbacks, we actively seek feedback to improve, and we're inspired by the success of others. As far as we're concerned, it all comes down to relationships, and I doubt many school leaders would disagree with that. We believe that without good relationships, we're unlikely to actively seek feedback from others or to be inspired by the success of others. These 3 quotations here, they all appear in the opening couple of paragraphs of our school policy for securing good behaviour for learning. And our approach at Priestlands is absolutely rooted in this ethos. In particular, that 3rd bullet point about the expectation that colleagues handle all situations with warmth and concern. And I think in a moment, when we get on to the attachment work we've been involved in, it'll be obvious how it fits in with what we're about as a school. Why do we get involved? Well, it's the Attachment to Aware Schools initiative. First of all, I suppose the timing was right. It would be fair to say that summer of 2016 and for some time before, I've been involved in conversations with staff from the areas I line managed about the importance of school staff having some understanding of attachment, all school staff. Already deeply ingrained in the approaches used by our SENCO, our ELSA workers, our school counsellor, it was something I was increasingly coming across in conversations with social workers about looked after children and children on the edge of care. And nobody took much convincing that we had a significant number of students who'd experienced trauma at Priestlands, and we knew that most staff would engage with at least some of those students at some point. So when the virtual school encouraged us to become involved, our SENCO, Layla, and I went along, and we attended training events run by the Hampshire Virtual School and Kate Cairns Associates. And we were really excited by what we learned. We learned that understanding how brains develop and function helps us to understand behaviour. We learned about how the brain works on a basic neurological level. I have to say this is all fairly new to me. I think Layla was much better versed already and keen for me to learn about it. The brain works best when people feel safe. We were asked some questions. Do we have children at our school who seem less able than their peers to manage everyday challenges? We don't seem to respond to the normal school systems which aim to control and modify behaviour through rewards and sanctions. And our answer was yes. Would we embrace strategies that help children whose behaviour makes it more difficult for them to manage everyday life, to develop new ways of using their brains? Yes. We learned that children can recover from the impact of things like toxic stress, and they can develop resilience through building and strengthening new connections in the brain. And the key message seemed to be that brain connections develop through relationship, that mindful co-regulation and co-learning. And we were introduced to emotion coaching, this high empathy approach where you follow a structured response, you recognise and actively label the emotion behind the behaviour, you help the person to get to a receptive state and then set limits on the behaviour, and then you problem solve with them. And this seemed to make perfect sense, and it seemed to be the very natural next step. Like most schools, for years we've held the view that, and we've trained all staff, that behaviour is a form of communication. We've tried to communicate to children that our Any disappointment we have is with their behaviour rather than the person behind it. We're confident that our staff understand that we need to be able to make a distinction between the behaviour and the feelings driving it. That a rigid disciplining response doesn't take account of emotions or self-esteem, and it's more likely to create anxiety or fear or anger in many children. And this approach, of course, is widespread. So like most schools, the work we've done with staff for a long time seems to be along the lines of emotion coaching, but well short of what emotion coaching really aims to do. But the notion that this fairly straightforward strategy for everybody can help to change a brain was kind of exciting. And this struck a real note for Layla and me in terms of how we could use it to the benefit of key students. And we were naming them there to each other as we sat there. Although maybe the defining moment for me, when I realised that emotion coaching was for all students and probably for adults as well, was when the trainer let slip that she regularly uses emotion coaching with her husband. And then, of course, the two of us couldn't resist wondering which of our colleagues would benefit most from emotion coaching. And the conversation continued with Layla on the return journey. We discussed what we'd learned. We decided that some of our staff were already well on the way towards emotion coaching. We knew that our ELSA workers were attachment aware and were already delivering programs with a lot of success to identified students in year 7 and 8. There's a photo there of Alex, one of our ELSA workers, and she doesn't always do her work in that little room there. Sometimes she's out in the walled garden where we've got a very sort of nurturing environment where youngsters work with animals and carry out horticultural activities. But some of the stuff done by the ELSA workers involves DESTI, which is an attachment-based social and emotional wellbeing program, and also zones of regulation, which is a cognitive behaviour approach to develop self-regulation, a kind of an anger management tool. So emotion coaching seemed to be something that would sit comfortably with some of the approaches we're already using. And it just made sense that we should make sure all staff became more attachment aware and understood how to use the emotion coaching approach. Just to give you an idea of what the support framework of the school looks like, students who are vulnerable are given this wraparound support in the hub, which is overseen by our Senko. The hub is a central standalone building in the middle of the site, which houses special needs, ELSA provision, nurture group, with a sensory room, behaviour support, homework club, breakfast club. And the referrals to the hub tend to come from the people along the bottom there, pastoral support managers. We've got one for each year group, non-teaching members of staff who are very much working at the coalface, picking up issues that happen during the day, etc. And then the heads of year and the senior team, of course, making those referrals. And you can see the people above that, they are the people who we refer to for specific support. What we did then, we had a session for all teaching staff and support staff who work with our students, looking at the neuroscience of human development, the brain of a baby with its 100 billion neurons and all those synaptic links being made, and everything being so dependent on relationships. And what staff found really interesting was the importance of secure attachment for education, how key aspects of cognition, which are so important for success in school, such as attention, memory, decision-making, social functioning, profoundly affected by, yes, emotion. We learned about the impact of toxic stress and things that stop traumatized children from learning. We asked staff to ask themselves, what were the behaviours in children who are not resilient when dealing with challenges in school? Maybe don't seem to be able to envisage and understand the consequences of their behaviour. And we pointed out that often they're unable to get to a calm, safe state with rational thinking, so they can't regulate their emotions. Colleagues discussed and began to identify a list of students who they felt were in that category. Emotion coaching was introduced as a strategy to meet the needs of particular students, but also as an approach to be used as appropriate with all students. And we recognise that, of course, it's not possible in a mainstream setting for many children to have one-to-one support. We stressed how crucial it was for all of us to have a basic understanding of attachment, and for as many as possible to try to use those basic emotion coaching strategies. And we had a really positive response. And why would the idea not be attractive to school staff? We were talking about an approach which enables children and young people to manage their own behaviour by helping them to understand the different emotions they experience, why they occur, how to handle them. The colleagues didn't see it as something which was soft or pink and fluffy, because it sets limits on the behaviour. And then further emotion coaching training was to take place with the key staff, those whose roles really involve supporting and responding to students known to have the highly emotional behaviour, who struggle to regulate stress and need a key figure to whom they have regular access. And in that session, we really dug down into the practicalities. It even involved a bit of that dreaded thing, role play. And this took place in the February, and it was delivered to basically all those people on the list from the slide before, from the heads of year, behaviour support manager, right through to cover staff, matrons, and education welfare officer. And we were doing some work as well already with our nearest primary school. Its site borders ours, and it's a key feeder school. They showed some interest, and so we did a training, later and I did a training session with them as well. And although it wasn't part of our initial plan, various staff found opportunities during the year to share the emotion coaching approach with parents. Examples of such occasions included a support strategy offered at a child in need planning meeting, where there were siblings in years 9 and 11. And there's also a suggested strategy when the head of year met with parents about a student behaving angrily at home. Now, because emotion coaching is all about an approach for dealing with behaviour in the moment, Layla created this simple credit card size resource for staff. It shows the 3 steps of emotion coaching, and on the reverse is Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. And by the way, if you haven't already seen Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain YouTube video, where he talks about flipping a lid, do so, please. I would really encourage you to. So it pretty much tells you everything you need to know. He talks about the upstairs brain, the rational thinking, and the downstairs brain, the emotion, fight or flight. And in a very straightforward way, it shows how we can use this illustration to help children, to help anyone understand when their emotions are rising up, how to take back control. And I love the fact in the video that he says it's emotion coaching, it's for ourselves and for our children. And he talks about having the presence of mind to do it, and to name it, to tame it, to name the emotion in order to tame it. So that was a little card we used with staff. Some other resources, there's this booklet which is produced by EHCAP, Education, Health, Care and Prison Services. And this is a booklet that we used with some of the students. It's got a little technical detail in there, so it wouldn't have been correct for everybody. It talks about how the brain works, Dan Siegel's hand model, and actually how to emotion coach your friends as well. And there's actually a version for parents as well, and that's what we've shared with parents on quite a small scale. And we're experimenting as well with this credit card size reminder to use with children. One of our PSMs put it together. It's quite wordy, as you can see, and you probably won't be able to read the detail in the text boxes, but we're going to work on that a little bit. But you can see it's trying to use colour and visuals and imagery to show how the brain works, and then also the imagery to talk about emotions and setting limits and thinking through problem solving, etc. So a couple of the resources we've been using. Some of the things we've wondered about before we started, and I suppose the main question on our minds was knowing how well emotion coaching has been implemented in primary schools, how would it go in a secondary? The primary setup is geared towards a relationship built with a class teacher, someone the class spend most of their time with, and quite probably a fixed TA in there as well. So this really seems suited to emotion coaching because of the easy access to that trusted adult. Secondary looks very different. What capacity will the individual staff have to emotion coach? Depending on the subject you're teaching, you see a teaching group between 1 and 6 times a week for a 50-minute lesson. How often will subject staff be able to spend more than a few seconds with a student? And with students having at least 12 teachers during their working week, how consistent would it be? Well, let me talk to you about what went well. We've had some successes. We've had some small-scale successes. I don't have data to show how it has reduced exclusions or improved attendance. I wouldn't say it's transformed the school, but it's such a large setting, I don't think I expected it to. The training was well received. Staff said they had a better understanding of attachment and trauma. Some subject staff said they'd used emotion coaching really successfully within their lessons. The emotion coaching agenda has had a really positive effect on the key staff trained. They all have anecdotes of having used it successfully. And I think those staff in those key supportive pastoral roles, especially those who have a background of understanding, have really naturally adopted it. One head of year told me how emotion coaches really helped her to manage the often intense emotional states of 3 key individuals in her year group. She says they now readily name their emotions, which helps them to move smoothly through the 3 steps. And I would point out here actually that having this training and delivering the training and just generally taking time to really think about trauma helped us to understand as a school that working with traumatized children induces stress in adults. One of the byproducts of this experience has been that we've set up supervision for our team of PSMs, as well as the ELSAs, our heads of year, and for our Senko as well. And that's something I'd really recommend, whatever other plans that you might have. 2 of the parents with whom we actively shared emotion coaching advice have reported that they found it useful at home. One parent sort of moaned at me, really, saying that my daughter tries to use it with me now all the time. Individual students have spoken clearly about how Miss X helps me to calm down by ... although they don't necessarily call it emotion coaching.
Sure.
What were the obstacles? Well, I suppose breaking habits. There was an assumption amongst some staff, including some very experienced staff, that we're already doing this, and what's the difference? And I get why people are saying that, because at Priestlands there is a warmth in the way that staff deal with students, but it wasn't necessary to try to get past this rather fixed view so that colleagues were open to embracing new learning about why some students behave in the way they do, who can't control themselves, but that we can help them change. Another obstacle, some colleagues found that they moved very quickly to setting the limits and problem solving without investing time in step 1 and the co-regulation aspect of step 2. So regular reinforcement of the importance of the 3 steps has been necessary, and this will continue. Interestingly, that was something that was also noticed by some of the support staff in classrooms. And actually, even the most experienced and emotion coaching embracing colleagues have been surprised at how much time and energy needs to be invested in getting to a secure step 1, often but not always. But however long step 1 takes, if you're not secure at step 1, it really is impossible to emotion coach effectively. Most subject staff said that they hadn't managed to use the 3 steps really effectively. And they gave some of the reasons as being, with the pressure to get the learning to happen in the limited time available, it was difficult. With a secondary timetable, meaning limited contact, they felt they didn't have capacity, although some said they had used it successfully. And some talked about how much it depends on the nature of the group you've got in front of you and the activity you're doing. And I can imagine they're absolutely right. There are certain activities when you really can't take your eyes off the whole group, maybe a practical science experiment or teaching trampolining or throwing the javelin. Some staff said emotion coaching doesn't always work, even with the same child. I think probably what we're saying there is that sometimes a student gets in too intense an emotional state, and it's unlikely, that they're almost too far gone. They just need perhaps some time on their own. Saw a very interesting thing last week in school when a young man had really lost it and was sort of stomping around the school, getting very, very angry and swearing and threatening and this kind of thing. And one of our heads of year was trying to talk to him, and I watched him, and he said to the boy, "Look, I can see how furious you are, and if that happened to me, I would be too. You're up here, aren't you?" And he put his hand above his head, sort of indicating where his emotions were. And just for a moment, the chap looked at him and looked him in the eye for the first time, and he said, "Yeah, I am. I'm really angry." But then he saw something else over his shoulder, and it triggered him, and he was off again. But for a moment, I was thinking to myself, if he can emotionally coach this chap down, that's going to be some kind of achievement. But I could see that sort of step 1 starting to happen potentially. And overall, and unsurprisingly, we found the larger your staff body, the bigger the challenge to get everyone on board and remembering to adopt an approach. So my last slide is about what we think we're going to do next. And as I said, we're a school that believes that children learn better and are happier when their emotional needs are being met. So we'll always be looking at ways of developing. We're going to work with the whole staff body to make sure that the natural first step is step 1 of emotion coaching. Ideally, we'll move towards a place where none of us find ourselves telling students, "Just calm down, will you?" or "There's no point getting angry about it." we're going to drip feed information and guidance and training rather than having a big blast at the beginning of the year or the beginning of a term. We're going to do it little and often. With everything we're learning about adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, there are very clear links there with emotion coaching. So ACEs will be part of our plan. Actually, our PSMs have become really interested in mindfulness, which goes hand in hand too. In fact, some of them are training to be able to run courses, so that will be part of the package. We need to find a better way of encouraging one another to experiment with emotion coaching. So I think probably sharing the small successes is key in that as well. We're thinking of including emotion coaching in some more structured work with parents, either as part of our year information evenings or as a discrete offer. We'll be training our peer mentors and we'll be working with staff running our engagement projects, encouraging them not to miss emotion coaching opportunities when they are in front of them. So that's us really, and I'm certainly not trying to set Priestlands up as a place where understanding of attachment and trauma and use of emotion coaching has changed the school. But we certainly see pockets of real success and we know how we want to take things forward. So now I'm really interested in hearing what anybody else out there might be doing in their schools and also any advice they might have for us about how we can improve things in our school.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Richard. Judy, Sebba here from the Rees Centre. That was really informative and also, I think, helped people to really get to grips with some of the practicalities of implementing this type of work. We'd like to hear from you now, those of you who have joined us. Any questions or comments? Just while you're putting them in the chat box, please, addressed to all panellists. That would be very helpful. In the meantime, I'm just going to ask Richard to say a little bit more about one of the biggest challenges that secondary schools face in trying to get all staff involved, and whether he's got any ideas for other schools about how that can be best maximised, especially given that staff change over time.
Well, I think it was important for us that, Layla and I worked together on it, and she has got a key responsibility for lots of staff and for lots of the support work that we offer in the hub. So there was a kind of a core on board already, and I was convinced that Layla would do a very good job of selling it with the support staff there. We thought it was important to train everybody, so it was all of the teaching staff plus all of the support staff who we knew regularly worked with the children. And then we had a kind of phase 2 of the training where we really dug down deeper into the practicalities with those key support staff. And I suppose it was just trying to get over the message about the importance of secure attachment for education itself, for us, for what we're doing. And that bit about those aspects of cognition, attention, memory, decision making, that kind of stuff, which is so affected by emotions, and convincing people that is the case.
Okay, I think we do have a question in now from Sarah. Has the attachment awareness emotion coaching changed your behaviour policy?
It hasn't changed the behaviour policy. In fact, we think it sits quite comfortably with it, really. My intention was to show in one of those first slides how it's very much at the heart of the way we do things at Priestlands anyway. So I wouldn't say it's changed the policy, no.
Have you explicitly mentioned it in your behaviour policy? Or?
No, we haven't yet. But that would be a natural next step, wouldn't it? Yeah.
To kind of rewrite it to include what you're doing, but explicitly kind of add it. That's great. You mentioned on your last slide about engagement projects, engagement activities. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about what that involves at your school.
Well, that's something really new, and they're still kind of in the planning stage, but we've got quite a bit of funding in, and so what we've done is we've talked to staff about what we feel is crucial, which is trying to work with some identified students whose engagement is an issue in terms of attendance or behaviour. Right. What can we do that's a bit more creative? So actually the things that are in the planning stage at the moment, there's going to be a bike workshop, a sort of a bike mechanic workshop, where we've got some staff who are really into their sort of biking, and also some support staff and some teaching staff. And so the idea being we identify some youngsters in year 9 and 10 we know are into their biking, but are also characters that we don't feel are kind of locked into what we're doing at school. So there's going to be that. There's a group of youngsters in year 7 and 8 who are going to involve in a coppicing sort of forestry skills program. There's a cookery club which is already up and running for some youngsters in year 7. And also we're working with the Prince's Trust to set up an Achieve Club as well for youngsters in year 7 and 8. Great. So all those things are going to sort of get going as this school year.
Do they happen as part of the school day, or are they after school?
They are, I think they're all going to be, probably the coppicing thing will involve perhaps a little bit of an afternoon sometimes, but on the whole they're going to be run as clubs, so that will involve issues around transport and that kind of thing. But
so we've got a couple of questions in now. I'm going to take them in reverse order just because they fit better with what you've been talking about that way round. So first of all, Tess McHugh is saying that her school has started the project in July, and lots of positive uptake from staff so far. But the biggest issue for them is the timing of step 1. Yeah. And when it's not feasible immediately, for an example, when a student takes an hour or more to calm down from a full meltdown,
absolutely,
timetabling the emotion coaching with the correct member of staff is very difficult. So any comments or thoughts on that?
Well, that kind of backs up what I've been saying. I mean, I'm not suggesting that everything's really easy for a primary teacher to do it, but of course, everything's in place in terms of the youngsters have that consistency of experience. They spend most of the time with one person, most of the day with one person. And there's more capacity there, I think, for somebody just maybe to step away and do some work with youngsters. But there is this in a secondary school. It is, if you come into a secondary school for the first time, you've not spent much time in a secondary school. People are in a bit of a spin because they're in terms of the pace of things and how things move and lesson to lesson. So it is difficult, I think. There might be some lessons where, because there's a very calm atmosphere and the youngsters are working independently, that you might be able to settle and spend a few minutes with the youngster. But as I think Tess said, sometimes they take an hour. I was actually going to say that. I've often been called to situations where, it's a major feat maybe to get a youngster away from the situation, out of the classroom, and then they may well easily take half an hour to do the calming down bit before you can start talking about anything else.
And is it because it's important that, so whichever sort of teacher the event happens around, it's important that they complete the steps, if you like, so that relationship to be repaired or whatever.
In the ideal world.
In the ideal world, of course, and that's where the difficulty comes.
The learning's got to happen. There are 25 youngsters there expecting their Spanish lesson. So, I mean, I don't know, but what we're going to try to get across is that, if that member of staff can at least get sort of step 1 going, if we then got somebody, if necessary, if it's a really intense situation, that youngster might need to be kind of removed from the situation, and then there will be the sort of person who will go along will be somebody who's had more of the kind of in-depth training and is obviously there and then in the moment got a bit of time on their hands to do it.
And then will that other member of staff maybe come back at some point in the day when appropriate to say, shall we now reconnect after what happened earlier?
Ideally,
that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got another question from David Kendall, who says, very refreshing to hear that you don't think it's that expecting to be able to measure the impact immediately. But he's taken on board your message about the use of pupil, parent and adult voice as key learning from today's presentation. Have you considered how you might express this to outside agencies and governors, for example, who might be expecting something more concrete? Perhaps you'd like to say a bit about governors, because they're key group that we get asked about quite a bit.
We talk to governors about it in governors' meetings. I have regular meetings with because my responsibility is DSL as well. I have regular meetings with the safeguarding governor, and we talk about safeguarding all aspects of behaviour and support as well. So they're aware of what we're doing, yes. But as I say, in terms of solid measures of impact, it's not easy to tell the difference that it's made.
Right.
But it's we are convinced of the importance of it, so therefore we're keen to be creative and to keep it moving forward.
And I guess it takes time to demonstrate that impact. Maybe that's what David's getting at, whether it's a challenge to keep governors' support, actually help get them to continue to be supportive while you're waiting for that, if you like, impact to be demonstrated. What about other agencies then? I assume, David, you mean, for example, the CAMS services or the other services that the school might be working with, do you? Maybe you could tell us in the chat box which agencies you were thinking of. Thank you, yes, about keeping the support there. I mean Ofsted, really. We thought you might mean Ofsted, but I didn't want to suggest that without, yeah.
I'm not sure whether I've got a good answer for that, really.
Yeah.
Okay.
When we last had Ofsted, they were very impressed with the kind of the wraparound support and the focused interventions that we have in place, and we were able, for example, with things like the DESTI program and the ZOR program, we're able to show clear evidence of improved engagement, and how youngsters' behaviour was settling, the very key characters who've been on the receiving end of that sort of intervention.
That's great.
I think we are beginning to see, David, some positive comments about attachment work in the Ofsted reports, if that helps you, and also interest from Ofsted themselves in the programme, the wider programme, which I'll come to shortly.
I'm wondering if you might be able to tell us a bit about the parental engagement that you've started. I think you indicated it, you're starting and done a bit. Just sort of tease that out a little bit more, some of the sort of literally the practical things how you've got them through the door, or what was the evening, or what was the session,
Well, the way we've used it so far has been when we've had meetings with parents, when we've had them in to talk about their youngsters, or for example, one of them was there were a couple of occasions when there was either a child protection conference or a SIN meeting, and we took the opportunity there and then to sort of start to talk about it, and then shared at a later date, sort of shared some of the literature and talk them through it. But what we're thinking about now is to try to do it on a more formal level, and to we have an information evening for each year group at the beginning of each year, and we normally get 250 adults on seats wanting to know about what year 8 is going to look like for their young person. And so, for example, we had it the one that happened last week for year 8 looked at our literacy strategy that we were working at with all the youngsters. And so, I'm thinking that could be a good way of talking about it, and if there is something we can hand out to parents as well in terms of how they could possibly use emotion coaching at home as well, then that would be a good way of getting lots and lots of them in school to hear that message.
And will that be sort of presented as this is one of the ethoses of our school,
Absolutely,
and kind of how we're approaching making sure children are ready to be able to engage in the classroom and engage in the learning.
And of course, if we'd want that continuity, wouldn't we? If youngsters are experiencing it in school, it would be great if then when they're in the home setting, that they get emotion coached by their parents as well.
So we have a further question here, is that okay? A further question from Sarah. Apart from drip feeding information about the emotion coaching throughout the year, have you thought of what is next for CPD for the whole staff in this area? And what to consider when, I've got do new staff get inducted?
Yes, to do, yeah.
Emotion coaching.
We have our induction manager who works with new staff at the beginning of the school year. So what would happen is either Layla or I book ourselves into one of those meetings to make sure that they're okay with it.
Yeah,
that's very helpful indeed. Any other questions or comments before we start to wrap up from anyone? Okay. Just then to finish off, we want to say something about the Rees Centre's engagement in this area in the Alex Timpson Attachment and Trauma Programme in schools. Some of you will know from the previous webinar that John Timpson has very generously supported the work on developing an evidence base in this area, and it was interesting to see how much the work that Richard described today fits the evidence base that we've got so far. The programme that we're undertaking is being run through the virtual schools nationally, the virtual schools in each local authority. So if you're from a school or a parent or anyone else in the system, and you're interested in hearing more about this, please get in touch with your virtual school head. We've also given some information about ourselves. There are emails if you want to get in touch with us. Typically, in the areas involved, we have about 24 local authorities involved at the moment. There are between 10 and 15 schools, though some have much less than that and some much more. But they're planning to do, or they are doing, whole school training and development in attachment and trauma awareness, taking on board some of the points that Richard's made about the importance of engaging absolutely everyone. And you can find more information about this on our website. If nobody has any other questions or comments, I'd just like to take this opportunity once again to thank Richard very much, to thank all of you for joining in,